Picture this: a weathered face, lined with years of experience, glistening with sweat under the unforgiving summer sun. Harold Jenkins, 78 years young and proudly wearing his faded Vietnam veteran cap, leans against a roadside guardrail, catching his breath. His worn boots have already carried him 12 miles since dawn, and his arthritic knees scream in protest with each step. But Harold doesn't complain. Never has. Never will. A sleek black SUV slows beside him, window humming down, to reveal a well-dressed man in his 40s, sunglasses masking his eyes but not his expression of disbelief. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need assistance?" The man's voice carries genuine concern. Harold straightens his back, military posture ingrained after all these years. "Just resting a moment. Got a doctor's appointment in Lakeside. Only 3 more miles to go." The man's eyebrows rise above his designer frames. "You're walking to Lakeside? In this heat? Please, let me drive you." Harold hesitates, pride warring with practicality. "Don't need charity, son." "It's not charity, sir. It's respect." Their eyes meet, an understanding passing between them that transcends generations. Harold nods once, decisive, and reaches for the door handle. Little did they know that this chance encounter on a dusty highway would change both their lives forever, reminding a community what it means to truly honor its heroes. "Let me take you back to where it all began." Harold Jenkins rises before the sun each morning, a habit formed during his 22 years of military service. His modest ranch-style home sits on the outskirts of Pine Grove, a small town that's changed more in the last decade than the previous 50 years combined. His morning routine never varies: stretching exercises to loosen stiff joints, a simple breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee, and a moment of silence for Elizabeth, his wife of 49 years who passed 3 winters ago. On this particular Tuesday, Harold studies the calendar where his VA appointment is circled in red. 3 months he's waited for this follow-up with the specialist about his heart condition. The bus that normally connects Pine Grove to Lakeside isn't running today. Budget cuts have reduced service to 3 days a week, and Tuesday isn't one of them. Harold reaches for the phone, considers calling his daughter in Seattle, then sets it down without dialing. Karen has enough on her plate with the kids and her job. He won't be a burden. Besides, he's walked farther carrying heavier loads in worse conditions. 15 miles is nothing to a man who once marched through Vietnamese jungles. The military shadow box on his wall catches the morning light, medals gleaming behind glass, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, service commendations that tell the story of a young man who answered his country's call without question. Beside it hangs a photograph of Harold in his dress uniform, arm around a radiant Elizabeth on their wedding day. "She'd give me an earful about being stubborn," he thinks with a small smile. Harold prepares methodically, water bottles in the small backpack, medication, VA paperwork, his trusty walking stick carved from oak, a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper, cell phone fully charged, though reception is spotty at best between towns. His neighbors wave as he sets out at 6:30 a.m. sharp. The Rodriguez family, transplants from California who bought the Wilson place last year, are loading their minivan for work and school. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins," calls Maria Rodriguez. "Need a ride somewhere?" "Just my constitutional," Harold replies with a friendly salute, not mentioning his destination. The Rodriguez family has been kind, bringing him homemade tamales at Christmas, helping clear his driveway after snowstorms. But they're busy with 3 kids, and their commute takes them in the opposite direction from Lakeside. As Harold walks past downtown Pine Grove, 2 blocks of storefronts, half of them vacant since the lumber mill closed, he nods to Frank, at the hardware store, who's unlocking his doors for the day. "Going far today, Harold?" Frank calls. "Just stretching these old legs," Harold answers, moving steadily onward. The town gives way to countryside within minutes. Harold maintains a careful pace, conserving energy for the long journey ahead. The morning is peaceful, filled with birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle from the Peterson farm. Harold breathes deeply, appreciating the scent of fresh-cut hay and wildflowers growing along the roadside. This isn't so bad, he thinks as the first hour passes. The highway has a decent shoulder and traffic is light. His mind wanders to his time in service, to friends long gone, to Elizabeth. Walking has always cleared his head, helped him process the things he's seen and done. At the county line, Harold pauses to drink water and rest for 5 minutes. No more, no less. A county sheriff's cruiser slows beside him. "Everything okay, Mr. Jenkins?" Deputy Wallace leans out his window, recognition dawning on his face. He's young, probably doesn't remember Harold from his years teaching history at Pine Grove High before retirement, but everyone knows everyone in a town this size. Right as rain, deputy. Just heading to Lakeside. The deputy frowns. That's quite a walk, sir. Can I offer you a ride? Appreciate it, but I'm enjoying the journey. Good for these old bones. Deputy Wallace looks unconvinced, but nods respectfully. Stay hydrated, sir. It's supposed to hit 90 today. He pulls away slowly, glancing in his rearview mirror at the solitary figure continuing down the highway. As the morning stretches toward noon, the sun climbs higher, and Harold feels its intensity. He's making good time, already 7 miles in, but sweat soaks through his light cotton shirt, and his pace has slowed. Cars occasionally pass, most drivers sparing barely a glance for the elderly man walking purposefully along the roadside. The first real moment of doubt comes as Harold crests a hill and feels a twinge in his chest. Nothing serious, probably just fatigue, but a reminder of why he's making this journey in the first place. He takes a nitroglycerin tablet from his pocket, just in case, and washes it down with water that's grown warm in its bottle. A luxury sedan speeds past, uncomfortably close, forcing Harold to step further off the shoulder. Through the tinted windows, he glimpses a man talking animatedly on his phone, completely oblivious to how close he came to clipping a pedestrian. 3 hours into his journey, Harold finds a rare patch of shade beneath an old oak tree and sits on a large rock to eat his sandwich. His feet throb in his boots, and he knows blisters are forming despite his thick socks. Still, he's made this kind of trek before, though admittedly not for many years. He checks his watch. Still 4 hours until his appointment. If he maintains his pace, he'll arrive with time to spare. As Harold continues his journey, the landscape gradually changes. Pine Grove's rural tranquility gives way to signs of suburban sprawl approaching Lakeside. Gas stations appear, fast food restaurants, strip malls, more traffic. It's at the 12-mile mark, with Lakeside's outskirts visible in the distance, that exhaustion truly sets in. The temperature has climbed past 90, and despite rationing, his water, Harold's last bottle, is nearly empty. His shirt clings to his back, and each step requires conscious effort. Yet Harold's expression remains stoic, his posture as straight as his aching back will allow. He reaches the guardrail where we first encountered him, needing a moment's respite before tackling the final 3 miles. That's when the black SUV approaches. Michael Thornton is running late for a meeting when he spots the elderly man in the veteran's cap leaning against the guardrail. Something about the solitary figure tugs at his conscience, compelling him to slow down despite his packed schedule. His father had served in Vietnam, would be about this man's age if cancer hadn't taken him 5 years ago. The brief conversation that follows, Harold's dignity, his reluctance to accept help, his matter-of-fact explanation of walking 15 miles for a doctor's appointment, strikes Michael deeply. As Harold settles into the passenger seat, Michael notices the details. The worn but clean clothes, the meticulously laced boots, the military precision with which Harold secures his seatbelt. Name's Michael Thornton, he offers, pulling back onto the highway. Harold Jenkins, former staff sergeant, 25th Infantry Division. My father was in Vietnam, 1st Cavalry Division. Harold nods, a look of recognition and respect crossing his features. Good outfit. He would have walked 15 miles too, Michael says with a small smile. Stubborn as they come. Not stubborn, Harold corrects gently. Self-reliant. The drive into Lakeside takes only minutes, but the conversation flows easily between them. Harold explains about the reduced bus service, about living alone since Elizabeth passed, about his heart condition that requires monitoring. They keep telling me to move into town, closer to services, Harold says, gazing out at the passing landscape. But my home is my home. Elizabeth and I built it together when I left the service. Raised our daughter there. Michael listens, hearing not just the words, but the pride and independence behind them. When they arrive at the VA Medical Center, he insists on waiting during Harold's appointment. I'll drive you home afterward. No arguments, Staff Sergeant. Harold's appointment reveals what he already suspected. His heart condition has worsened slightly. The doctor adjusts his medication, schedules a follow-up, and expresses concern about Harold living so far from emergency services. Have you considered assisted living? The doctor asks, not for the first time. I'm not there yet, Harold responds firmly. When Harold emerges from his appointment, Michael is waiting as promised. They stop for a late lunch at a diner near the hospital, where Michael insists on paying despite Harold's protests. As they eat, Michael asks questions about Pine Grove, about Harold's life, genuinely interested in the older man's stories. So, how will you get to your next appointment? Michael asks as they finish their meal. The bus still only runs 3 days a week. Harold shrugs. I'll figure something out. Always have. Michael hesitates, then pulls out a business card. I live in Lakeside but work in Greenvale. I drive through Pine Grove 3 days a week. Your next appointment, what day? First Thursday of next month. I drive through on Thursdays. I could pick you up on my way in, take you to your appointment, and drive you home afterward. He sees Harold's expression and adds quickly, "My father would haunt me if I didn't offer, sir." Harold studies the card. Michael Thornton, Regional Manager, Northwest Savings and Loan. He thinks of the long walk, of his doctor's concerned face. Pride and practicality wage their battle again. Thursday mornings would work, he finally concedes. And so begins an unexpected friendship. Every Thursday, whether Harold has an appointment or not, Michael stops in Pine Grove. Sometimes they just share coffee at Harold's kitchen table. Sometimes Michael drives Harold to the grocery store, or to visit Elizabeth's grave. Harold shows Michael his workshop, where he crafts wooden toys for his grandchildren and the local children's hospital. Michael shares stories of his father, of his own failed marriage, of his job's pressures. 2 months into this routine, Michael arrives to find Harold struggling with a leaking roof. Without being asked, he rolls up his sleeves and helps make repairs. The following week, he brings proper tools and materials, and they spend the day fixing gutters and replacing damaged shingles. Elizabeth always said the roof would outlast her, Harold comments as they work. She was right about that. My dad was handy too, Michael replies. Never hired anyone to do what he could do himself. I wish I'd paid more attention when he tried to teach me this stuff. You're doing fine, Harold assures him, demonstrating how to properly seal a joint. Just need practice. As autumn approaches, their friendship deepens. Harold introduces Michael to his neighbors, to the remaining shopkeepers in Pine Grove's struggling downtown. Michael, seeing the town through Harold's eyes, begins to notice things. The lack of public transportation, the closed community center, the limited services available to elderly residents trying to age in place. One Thursday in October, Michael arrives with news. My bank is looking at opening a small branch office between Lakeside and Greenvale. I've suggested Pine Grove. He explains how the town's location could serve rural customers from surrounding communities, how the vacant former hardware store on Main Street would be perfect with renovation. Harold listens skeptically. Banks aren't keen on opening branches these days, especially in dying towns. Pine Grove isn't dying, Michael insists. It's just been overlooked. 2 weeks later, Michael brings preliminary plans for the branch, spreading them across Harold's kitchen table. The regional VP is visiting next week. I'd like you to meet him, show him around town. Harold raises an eyebrow. Why me? Because you know everyone and everyone respects you. Because you can tell the town's story better than anyone. When the regional vice president visits, Harold gives him a tour of Pine Grove that goes beyond storefronts and statistics. He introduces him to Maria Rodriguez, whose family dreams of opening a restaurant but drives 40 minutes to the nearest bank. He shows him the school where the computer lab needs updating, the veterans memorial that needs restoration, the potential the town holds. By December, the plans are approved. The bank will open a small branch in Pine Grove by summer, bringing 5 jobs initially. More importantly, they'll provide a community room that can host financial literacy classes, senior services, and youth programs. Michael will oversee the project while maintaining his position in Greenvale. News of the bank's arrival sparks other changes. A developer inquires about renovating the abandoned mill into apartments. The county reconsiders the bus route, proposing an increase to 5 days a week. Pine Grove begins to stir with cautious optimism. Through the winter months, Michael continues his Thursday visits to Harold. They discuss the bank's progress, the town's future, their own lives. When Harold catches a severe case of pneumonia in February, it's Michael who drives him to the emergency room in Lakeside, who contacts Karen in Seattle, who checks on the house while Harold recovers in the hospital. Karen flies in for a week, meeting Michael and witnessing the friendship that has formed between her father and this unexpected connection to the outside world. Dad's never been one to accept help easily, she tells Michael over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. I've noticed, Michael says with a smile. But he gives more than he takes. He's taught me a lot these past months. By spring, Harold has recovered, though the pneumonia has left him weaker than before. His doctor recommends more frequent checkups, which now seem manageable with improved bus service on the horizon and Michael's reliable presence. The bank renovation begins in April, transforming the old hardware store into a modern facility while preserving its historical facade. Harold often walks downtown to watch the progress, offering occasional suggestions that the contractors have learned to value. On a warm day in May, nearly a year after their chance encounter on the highway, Michael and Harold sit on Harold's front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and purple. I've been thinking, Michael says after a comfortable silence. The bank apartment upstairs, the one reserved for the manager. I'm considering taking it, at least part-time, 3 nights a week, when I'm working in Pine Grove. Harold glances at him, surprised. What about your place in Lakeside? I'll keep it for now. But being here part of the week would make more sense with my new responsibilities. He pauses. And I've grown fond of this town. Because of the business opportunity, Harold says. A statement rather than a question. Michael shakes his head. Because it reminds me of where I grew up. Because the people here look out for each other. Because my father would have loved it. He smiles. And because I wouldn't have to drive so far for our Thursday meetings. Harold nods slowly, understanding all that remains unsaid between them. How they've become family of choice. How Michael's presence has made it possible for Harold to remain in his home despite his health challenges. How their chance encounter has revitalized not just their lives, but potentially an entire community. The grand opening of Northwest Savings and Loan's Pine Grove branch takes place on a perfect June day, almost exactly 1 year after Harold's 15-mile walk. The ribbon-cutting ceremony attracts people from throughout the county. The regional vice president speaks about community investment and rural development, but it's Michael's speech that captures the true significance of the moment. You may wonder why a bank would choose Pine Grove, he begins, looking out at the assembled crowd. The answer is standing right there. He points to Harold, seated in the front row. This gentleman taught me that the measure of a community isn't its size or its economic status, but the character of its people. When I met Harold Jenkins, he was walking 15 miles to a doctor's appointment because there was no bus service. That day, he wasn't complaining, just doing what needed to be done. That's Pine Grove. People who do what needs to be done, who help their neighbors, who don't give up on their community. Michael continues, explaining how the branch will serve the financial needs of the area while also providing space for community services. He announces partnerships with the local school, a telemedicine program that will operate from the community room, financial education scholarships for local students. After the ceremony, as people enjoy refreshments and tour the new facility, a reporter from the Lakeside Chronicle approaches Harold. Mr. Jenkins, how does it feel to know your 15-mile walk inspired all this? Harold looks uncomfortable with the attention but answers honestly. It wasn't about my walk. It was about someone taking the time to stop and listen. Michael could have driven past like everyone else that day. Instead, he stopped. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone willing to stop and see another person's needs. The story runs in Sunday's paper. Elderly veterans' 15-mile walk leads to community revival. It's picked up by regional news, then national. Harold's discomfort with the spotlight grows, but he recognizes the importance of the narrative, not for his own recognition, but for what it might inspire others to do. Letters begin arriving from across the country, veterans sharing similar experiences of isolation and limited services. Community organizers asking for advice on rural revitalization. Young people expressing admiration for Harold's determination and Michael's response. The most meaningful letter comes from a banker in a small Minnesota town who writes, after reading about your experience, I drove through the rural areas our branch serves. I counted 7 towns without banking services, where elderly residents must travel significant distances for financial needs. We're now planning mobile banking days in these communities. Thank you for the wake-up call. 1 year after their first meeting, Michael has settled into his part-time residence above the bank. He spends 3 nights a week in Pine Grove, where he's joined the volunteer fire department and helped establish a community garden in the vacant lot behind the post office. His Thursday visits to Harold continue, though they now often include other community members, especially since Harold agreed to lead a veterans support group that meets in the bank's community room. The Rodriguez family has opened their restaurant on Main Street, with financing from Northwest Savings and Loan. The county has restored daily bus service connecting Pine Grove to Lakeside and Greenvale. The old lumber mill's renovation into apartments is underway, with a waiting list already forming for the affordable senior units that will occupy the ground floor. Harold's health remains stable, managed through regular appointments that no longer require extraordinary measures to attend. Karen visits more frequently, relieved to see her father thriving despite his age and health challenges. She's considering moving back to the area when her youngest graduates high school next year. On a crisp autumn morning, Harold and Michael sit on a newly installed bench along Pine Grove's main street, drinking coffee and watching the town come to life. The hardware store is opening its doors. Children wait for the school bus. Maria Rodriguez arranges fresh flowers outside her restaurant. Did I ever tell you, Harold says quietly, that I almost didn't walk that day? I almost called my daughter to drive down from Seattle. Michael shakes his head. What changed your mind? Stubbornness, Harold admits with a slight smile. Or self-reliance, as I prefer to call it. "I'm glad you're stubborn," Michael replies. "And I'm glad I was running late that day. If I'd been on schedule, I might have driven right past." Harold nods, understanding how easily their paths might not have crossed. How many such potential connections are missed every day. Elizabeth always said things happen for a reason. Smart woman, Michael says. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Harold assures him. "She always said I needed someone to keep an eye on me." They sit in comfortable silence, watching their small town embrace a new day, a new chapter. The journey that began with a 15-mile walk has come full circle, reminding everyone in Pine Grove, and now, through their story, communities beyond, that sometimes the longest journeys lead exactly where we need to go. Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that created ripples far beyond its original impact? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how unexpected connections have changed your community or your life. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring true stories that remind us how we're all connected through compassion and respect. Remember, sometimes the most important journey isn't about the distance traveled, but about who walks beside us along the way.